Hi, today we'll show you how you can turn your images into realistic looking stencil artwork. And to do this we're going to use the Stencil Art Creator Photoshop action. Later in the demonstration we'll be turning this image into a number of different pieces of stencil artwork. It's all really quick and very easy to do, but before that I'm just going to take you through a selection of artwork that we created with the action earlier. Here's the original image before we run the action. We have defined the area that we want to spray, and once the action is complete we have a piece of stencil art sprayed onto a backdrop. This and several other backdrops are included with the action, and we'll show you how to quickly swap between those in a moment as well. Here's another image, selection area, and after running the action, the finished artwork. This backdrop is also included with the action. Another image, selection area, and we used a custom backdrop for this artwork. In addition to the backdrops provided, the action produces a dedicated layer where you can paste your own backdrop images. The stencil artwork is then instantly applied to the backdrop. And we have yet another image, selection area, custom backdrop, and finished artwork. And I'll just toggle between the original image and the custom artwork quickly for you. Okay, so we'll return back to the original image and we'll close the rest of these windows. Next, we'll show you how to install the action. After the install is complete, you should be able to run the action as many times as you want, and there's no need to perform the install every time you run the action. So, we'll start by loading the main action set, and to do this, we'll need to access the Actions panel. If you can't see the panel, go to Window and select Actions. Once the panel appears, go to the menu and select Load Actions. You'll need to browse to the location where you saved all of the Stencil Art Creator files, and you should see the Stencil Art Creator in action. We'll load that. We will also load the toolkit actions, and you should see those appear in the Actions panel. Next, we'll need to load all of the associated resources, and to do that, go to Edit, Presets, Preset Manager. We already have brushes selected, so we'll go ahead and load the brushes in. And the brushes file should be located in the same folder as the action files. And we'll see those appear here. Next, we'll select Patterns. The Stencil Art Creator Backdrop Patterns file should be located in the same folder as well. This is a relatively large file, so it may take a little while to load. Okay, the patterns should now appear in the Preset Manager, and that completes our install. Done. In this next step, we'll check the image is set up in a way that the action can run smoothly. First, you will need to be running an English version of Photoshop CS5 or later. For the best results, your image should be in 8-bit and RGB colour modes, and be between 2000 and 4000 pixels along its longest edge. Even if your image is smaller than this, we would recommend you try upscaling it. The action is extremely flexible and should still give great results. Your image will need to contain 2 layers, a Photoshop background layer and a layer named Select. These changes can be made in the Layers panel. If you can't see the Layers panel, go to Window and select Layers. If you don't have a background layer, select the layer you want to use as a background and go to Layer New Background from Layer. To create a select layer, click on New Layer and rename the layer Select. Both of these layer names should be in lowercase with the first letter in uppercase, and the background layer should have a little locked icon on the right. And lastly, your brush opacity should be set to 100%. To check this, select the brush tool and make sure opacity is set to 100. If you're not confident in making these changes or would like to speed up the process, there should be an image setup action in your toolkit action set to help guide you through it. Next, we'll create our selection area to let the action know which part of the image we want to spray. There's a whole host of selecting techniques available in Photoshop. However, as this image has a plain white background, we'll be using the Magic Wand tool for the main selection, and we'll tidy that selection up with the Quick Selection tool. So let's start with the Magic Wand tool. I've set the tolerance very low. 2 or 3 should be good enough for this image. Anti-alias is ticked, and contiguous is ticked as well. And we'll just select the background and then an area in white in the background. So we don't actually want the background to be the selected part. I'm going to inverse that selection by going to select, inverse, and now we have the skateboarder selected. Next, I'll choose the Quick Selection tool, and we're just going to go around that selection and make sure everything's included. I'm going to set that size down to something a little bit smaller. 8 pixels should do it. And I'm just going to tidy up areas of this selection. I'll go around the whole selection and press Option or Alt, depending on which operating system you're on, to subtract from that selection. We don't need to be super precise with this. So I'm just going to check. Okay, I'll subtract from that selection a little bit there, a little bit there. And there's a whole host of white here. And stretch of white here. And I think that looks good to me. And now we have our selection area. We're going to fill those pixels in on the select layer. So make sure the select layer is highlighted, and we'll go to Edit and Fill. From the Fill dialog, select any color and ensure the opacity is set to 100 and Preserve Transparency is unticked. And click OK. You'll see our selection area has now been defined on the select layer. And we're now ready to run the action. So we'll select the Stencil Art Creator action from the Actions panel and hit play. Shortly after the action begins, we'll see a prompt. This prompt is just giving you the heads up about adjusting the threshold settings, and you can safely hide or delete that prompt from within the action. And now we see the threshold slider control, which will allow us to control the level of detail or black spray used in the artwork. Using the slider, I'm going to look for a relatively even coverage of black and white, and also ensure that the level of detail in the focal points is maintained. And that should do it. Now, depending on the image size and processor power, the action should only take a minute or two, but to save time I think we'll cut to when the action is finished. And here we have the finished stencil artwork sprayed onto one of the backdrops included with the action. I'm going to resize the actions panel and the layers panel so everything's easier to read, and just in case I'm going to save the image. Then we'll take a closer look at what the action has created and how easy everything is to customize. I'm going to start by quickly running through the spray layer groups, and I'll turn off all the layers so we can see how the artwork is built up. Firstly, there's a background color layer, and if we're using a backdrop, we'll need to keep that as mid-gray. If you just want your artwork to appear on a solid color backdrop, you can adjust that by double-clicking on the layer thumbnail. Then we have two layer groups for the spray, one for the white spray and one for the black. And I'll just zoom in on the image so you can see the spray a little more clearly. Each of the spray groups contains a similar set of layers: a base or motif layer that contains the shape outline, a layer for fine overspray or splatter, a layer for coarse overspray, and in the case of the black spray group, a layer for the drips. We'll come back and look at those layer groups in a moment after we've taken a look at the backdrop layer group, which I'll turn on now. I'll also turn on the vignette layer, and that will help frame the image. The backdrop layer group consists of two backdrop layers: the pattern backdrop layer and the Your Background Here layer, along with a number of masking and effects layers. To change the backdrop pattern, select the backdrop layer and double-click on the thumbnail. From the Pattern Fill dialog, we can scale or move the pattern around. Or we can change the pattern completely. There are several patterns included with the action, and it's definitely worth having a play around with the scale and positioning of these, as most of the included backdrops have a good mix of plain and busy areas. A really nice feature of the Stencil Art Creator action is the ability to add your own backdrops, and this definitely helps create a realistic and unique piece of stencil art. To do this, we use the layer named Your Backdrop here. And all we need to do is open our backdrop image. And we're going to select all and copy backdrop and paste it into our stencil artwork document. You'll see the artwork is instantly applied to the backdrop. But before we start playing around with this backdrop too much, I'm going to convert it into a smart object so we can preserve those pixels. Now we can safely reposition and scale the backdrop to where we want it. You can see as I do this, the stencil artwork is instantly applied to the backdrop in real time, which makes it nice and easy to position. Okay, so I'm happy with how this backdrop is positioned, but I'd like to see more of it, so I'm just going to reveal all. Yeah, that's better. We've chosen a mid-tone backdrop with subtle artifacts and lighting for this demonstration. However, the action has been developed to accept a wide variety of backdrops. As it's impossible to tell which backdrops will be used, the action produces a set of effects layers that can quickly be altered to make the scene appear more realistic. The backdrop color layer helps tone down or alter the color of the backdrop. As with all of the effects layers, we can use the layer opacity slider to alter how much of the effect is applied. This particular layer is extremely helpful when the intensity of the above effects have been increased. But I think I'll set that back to 50%. The backdrop texture blocker controls how much of the backdrop texture shows through the stencil artwork. You can see if I increase this to 100, very little of that texture is showing through. But as I want the texture to really pop through on this one, I'm going to just hide that layer. Backdrop contrast adjusts the overall brightness and contrast of the image. And I'm going to increase that to 100% to really make that texture come through. The white and black fade effect layers control how faded each layer of spray will appear on the backdrop. As this image is pretty light anyway, we'll take the white up to 100 to make some of that texture come through. And because we want the texture to come through the black as well, we'll put that up to 100%. And if we ever need to change the effect in any way, we can also do that in the properties panel. So I'm just going to darken the black texture by decreasing the brightness. And finally, stencil color. This controls how much color is picked up by the stencil. It's beneficial to let some color through, as this will appear more realistic. Set that back to 75. Okay, so I think we'll zoom out and take a look at our finished piece. And that covers most of what you'll need to create realistic looking stencil art, selecting your spray area, running the action, and tweaking the backdrop. To finish, we'll demonstrate a few more features and techniques that you may find helpful when creating your artwork. And to do this, I'm going to revert back to the version of the document we saved earlier. Okay, so we'll start with the actions associated with drips. These actions will allow you to add more drips to the scene, and you can choose to add either short, medium, or long drips. We'll run the short drips action. And the medium drips. And try some long drips. And if you add too many drips, there's an action to remove the drips altogether. If you would like to add your own drips, highlight the black drips layer in the black spray layer group, select the brush tool and one of the DC wide drip brushes by right mouse clicking. I already have the long drip selected, so I'll add one of those and a few medium ones, and a few short ones. Once you are finished, you will need to run the Stencil Art Backdrop Reapply action. This action will update all of the backdrop layers to reflect manual changes you have made to any of the spray layers. You can remove the white spray layer from your artwork by running the white hide action. And if you would like it back, run the white unhide action. The remaining tools are for masking your artwork from the backdrop, and I'll show you those in a second on a different backdrop. I'm just going to revert the image again, and now I'll apply the new backdrop. And we have our new backdrop. You'll notice that this time our backdrop is actually smaller than our artwork, and it's set at an angle. So this time I'm going to transform the artwork rather than the background. We do this by selecting one of the artwork spray layers. It doesn't really matter which one, as long as there is a linking icon on the right, and we'll select Free Transform. We can now position our artwork using a mixture of scale and distort, both of which can be accessed via the right mouse click. And I'm going to use visual clues within the backdrop, the doorway for scale, and also the top and the bottom of the boards for perspective. And I think we'll go ahead and crop this image to the backdrop. You'll notice that I've intentionally placed the artwork on top of an object, and this is so I can show you how to use the masking actions. Okay, firstly I'm going to select your backdrop mask layer, and then using the lasso tool I'm going to select the object, and I'm not going to be too precise here, just to save a little time. And as I'll be masking the artwork to the boards and not to the object, I'm going to inverse that selection and fill. We can now run the mask apply action. And there we see our artwork masked to the backdrop. If you want to remove the mask, just run the mask remove action. And to complete this piece, I'll quickly adjust the effects layers. And there we have something a little bit more realistic. And that completes our demonstration. The Stencil Art Creator Photoshop action is available from the links in the description, along with links to further information, guidance and support. Thanks for watching and happy spraying.